And that's the beginning part of the video, of the introduction for the beginning part of the program. So with that, I'll turn it over to the fabulous Jean Meserve.
Thank you, Scotty, for that very generous introduction. Always appreciated. It's an honor for me to be here to facilitate this conversation with such a distinguished group on such an important topic. Critical earth minerals, as most of you know, are vital components to so many cutting-edge technologies, from smartphones to wind turbines, from radars to electric vehicles, and demand for them is growing exponentially. But here's the rub. China controls most of the mining and the processing, presenting both an economic and security challenge to the West. Today, we'll explore whether and how the U.S. and Canada, government and the private sector can cooperate to form an alternative supply chain, a North American supply chain. Just a few words about our format here today. You're going to hear from some of the three of the key players in this space, and then we're going to have two panel discussions, one of them with government officials, the other with the private sector. During the panel discussions, we encourage you in the audience to participate by submitting a question in the chat. So first, a high-level perspective on the issue from both sides of the border. Let me start with Congressman Mike Doyle of Pennsylvania, a senior member of the House Energy and Commerce Committee. Congressman, take it away.
Well, thank you, Jean, and thank you for inviting me to participate in this discussion today. This is my second battery supply chain roundtable this week, so clearly there's a lot of momentum on this issue right now. The Biden administration has made a clear commitment to bringing back manufacturing and ensuring we have the supply chains we need here in North America. I'm pleased to see that the Canadian government also recognizes how important developing domestic supply chains will be, and that President Biden and Prime Minister Trudeau have agreed to work together to bolster a regional battery metal supply chain. It will take cooperation and planning to build the battery supply chain out to where it needs to be. The urgency of this effort has been heightened not only because we have seen how critical it is to have a domestic supply chain for many products over the past year, but because we are at the beginning of an explosion of growth in the electric vehicle and battery storage markets. If we want the United States and Canada to remain competitive in these markets, we need to be planning and investing now. The challenge of ensuring our industries have critical materials is not only a national security issue, it's an economic security issue. Right now, China has 100 battery mega factories built or planned, and more critical mineral reserve rights than any other country. Meanwhile, the United States has plans for around 9. This will leave our industries vulnerable to supply chain disruptions, making our companies less competitive and foregoing good-paying manufacturing jobs. But building out a supply chain to sustain these growing industries will take collaboration. Our Canadian friends have always been good partners, and I believe we can work together to build a strong North American battery manufacturing industry. Without a coordinated effort and strong public and private investment, we won't be able to outcompete China or even our European friends. I believe that Canada has the resources and America has the manufacturing capability, ready to go auto industry, and we can create a strong battery material supply chain that can compete worldwide and provide good jobs in both our nations. We must start making these partnerships and investments now. We've already seen the investment from the private sector with companies like Tesla, Ford, General Motors committing to build electric vehicles. So we need to work with these companies to build the domestic supply chains that they're going to need. And I, for one, can't imagine a better scenario than the logistical efficiencies gained from partnering with our Canadian friends. As I mentioned, President Biden has made investing in building the battery supply chain to address shortfalls a priority of his administration. And I and many of my colleagues in Congress are committed partners in this effort. I'm hopeful that this year we can pass meaningful legislation like my Energy Storage Tax Incentive and Deployment Act to incentivize energy storage development, and a manufacturing credit that Senators Manchin and Stabenow have introduced, and my forthcoming legislation to ensure that we're investing in the mid-tier supply chain. My legislation would provide $10 billion in grant funding for companies to build or retool factories to process materials and manufacture battery components. The White House included such a program in its American Jobs Plan, and the battery supply chain review the administration completed noted that grant funding to rebuild our manufacturing was a critical piece of building up our domestic battery supply chain. I believe Canada also has a major role to play in this puzzle, as it makes no sense to me that we would continue shipping critical minerals to China to be processed, only for those components to be sent back here. We should be using the workforce and minerals processing and manufacturing capabilities already present in both of our countries to do this. I believe that the battery manufacturing industry can be an example to others. With key investments, manufacturing supply chains can be brought back to North America, and we can create good paying long-term jobs in Canada and the United States. I know Director Stanley from the Office of Material Industries at the Department of Commerce is here today and is a great resource for you all. I look forward to working with my colleagues in Congress and with the administration on strengthening our cross-border ties and building a strong battery materials supply chain in North America. Thank you again for inviting me. I apologize that I need to catch a plane to get back to my district. I hope you all enjoy the conversations today. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Congressman, for joining us. And now for a Canadian perspective, let me introduce Marc Serré. He is a member of Parliament. He is also Parliamentary Secretary to Canada's Minister of Natural Resources. Over to you.
Thank you, Jean. Hello, everyone. Bonjour à tous, Annie, and well said, Congressman Doyle. It's really a great joining you from my office here in the nation's capital, here region, as the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Natural Resources, and also a Member of Parliament for Newbold in Greater Sudbury, which is very appropriately named as it is located in what we proudly call the unofficial mining capital of Canada. I want to begin by recognizing all the Indigenous peoples with a connection to this land in Ontario, including Nipissing First Nations, Atikamekw, and Wenipete First Nations. I want to further acknowledge that the lands from what I'm joining you today in Ottawa is the traditional lands of the Atikamekw Algonquin people. So I want to thank the Canadian American Business Council for hosting our discussion today. It's not only important and timely, as said earlier, it's also builds on the Council's vital work supporting the greatest bilateral trade relationship in the world, one unrivaled by any other country anywhere. In fact, Canada buys more goods from the United States than China, Japan, and United Kingdom combined. Our economies are so interconnected that whatever car is assembled in Detroit, Michigan, or Oshawa, Ontario, the parts for it will cross the border 5 or 6 times. Bottom line, our continued collaboration is essential for our shared prosperity and to meeting the challenges of our post-COVID-19 recovery. Mining is central to all of that. As a great enabling industry in the 21st century, starting with the critical minerals we all need to produce a clean technologies that will help us reach our urgent climate goals. You know that as well as anyone. We've already heard some of the examples. An electric car has 3 times more copper under the hood than a typical gasoline-powered vehicle. And a wind farm needs 8 times the minerals of a comparable conventional gas-fired power plant, which means that we have to make sure our 2 countries have access to a secure, reliable supply of these critical minerals. And neither of us, as Congressman Doyle said, can do this on our own. That's why Canada and the United States has signed a joint action plan on collaboration for critical minerals. This isn't a nice to have agreement. This is essential to both our country's economy and national security. to advancing everything from industry engagement and defense supply chains to R&D and data exchanges. As stated previously, this is why Prime Minister Trudeau and President Biden have signed a strengthening the Joint Action Plan, a priority when they met in February to discuss the roadmap for a renewed U.S.-Canada partnership. The two leaders agreed that this enhanced collaboration was central to everything from accelerating a net zero industrial transformation and developing batteries for zero emission vehicles to improving renewable energy storage. We've seen the benefits of this collaboration over the past year with significant progress on a number of fronts, including collaborating on a critical minerals mapping initiative to improve mineral discovery and build a diversified supply of critical minerals in North America, promoting, improving mineral governance and sustainable development through the U.S.-led Energy Resource Governance Initiative to ensure responsible mining sourcing and convening industry stakeholders from both sides of the border to identify opportunities to build supply chains in strategic sectors such as North American continental defense and develop a new business-to-business relationship. Alongside all of this, Canada continues to advance its own domestic efforts. For example, we released Canada's critical minerals list this spring at the virtual PDAC, Prospectors and Developers Association in Toronto, the world's premier event on mineral exploration and mining convention, identifying a collection of 31 minerals to let investors know where Canada intends to focus, the minerals that we can deliver, the high value supply chains we can build, and the support we can provide for clean tech and sophisticated manufacturing. In addition, our federal budget this spring included $48 million for federal research and development to advance critical mineral processing and refinery expertise, as well as another $9.6 million to create a critical minerals center of excellence at Natural Resources Canada. Le Canada est bien placé pour montrer la voie à suivre dans le secteur de la production minéraux-critique. But we also know there is more work to be done, which is why I'm looking forward to hearing our panelists' insight and discussion and the dialogue today regarding very important issues like geopolitical situation regarding critical minerals and rare earths, the status of the Canada-U.S. agreement on critical minerals, and what it takes for Northern America to overtake China as a world leader to develop and commercialize resources, the challenge and opportunities for Canada-U.S. to be a leader and dominate this sector, because this is our moment. If we were daring enough to seize it, we need to do this. Thank you for all attending today and participating, and a special thanks to the private sector, mineral operations, the officials at the U.S. federal and state governments in Canada, and the provincial government of Quebec, as well as the CABC members. Enjoy today's roundtable and expert panelists. Truly an honor to be addressing you today. Thank you. Merci. Miigwech.
Marc Serré, Member of Parliament and Parliamentary Secretary to Canada's Minister of Natural Resources. Thank you very much. And also with us today to help set the stage is Ian Lang. He is Director of the Mineral and Energy Economics Program and an Associate Professor in the Division of Economics and Business at the Colorado School of Mines. He worked previously at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Energy, and the Council of Economic Advisors. Dr. Lang, over to you.
Thank you. Yes, it's an exciting time to be discussing critical minerals and to be, educating the future leaders of the mineral and energy industry. So my comments, I want to focus on some economic aspects of the mineral supply chain. So most critical minerals are or were byproducts of larger major metals production processes. And additionally, the processing sector is characterized by high fixed costs and relatively low margins. This makes it difficult to coordinate all aspects of a mineral supply chain across the many minerals. we need to make sure that a highly capitalized mining firm can separate out all of the different potential minerals, metals that are in their mine. And then we have to make sure that the processing sector has the right level of capacity, right level meaning levels that can make profits in our sort of decentralized market economies, but also the ones that can provide the right kind of materials that these clean energy technologies will use. There needs to be coordination amongst firms to ensure that these processing sector operates smoothly. This all plays out under an industry dynamic where OECD countries have to compete with, the major player, China, where China's willing to use its government and regulatory apparatus, right, to ensure that they stay a leader in this industry. I hope these thoughts provide some stimulus to panelists to think about how we're going to fit all of the critical mineral pieces together, given sort of the changing demand for different types of minerals, the way that minerals are pulled out of the ground, and then the specific ways minerals have to be processed. Thanks. Back to you, Jean.
Ian Lang of the Colorado School of Mines, thank you. And before we begin our first panel, a quick introduction to introduce the people who will be participating. All right, General Newbold, let's start this discussion with you, if you don't mind. You are a military man, and I'd love to hear from you how important these critical minerals are in the defense sector, and from a strategic point of view, how important it is for us to create a supply chain that is not reliant on China.
Jane, the short answer and the obvious answer is that critical minerals are absolutely essential to national defense. More depth on that is that virtually every technology that might give the United States and Canada a leg up rely on critical minerals. As examples, in aircraft, satellites, submarines, radar, lasers, optics, communication systems, and I could go on, but those are a few of them. And in essence, if there's a commercial application for critical minerals, then there's also a military application. As just one example, the U.S., Canada, and our allies will possess a little over 400 of the most advanced fighters, the F-35. Each one of those aircraft uses over 900 pounds of critical minerals. It would not be possible to fly that aircraft with the capabilities it has without critical minerals. But what I'd really like to do is expand on the common definition of national security, because I don't think it's very helpful for this discussion. National security, national power are a combination of economic, political, moral, informational, military, etc., political among them. While the military needs critical minerals, our economy is our strength, and without critical minerals to be competitive, then we are on the losing end of the equation, we being the collective body of the U.S. and our allies. And it doesn't have to be a malevolent China that controls and dominates in critical minerals. They have shown in the past, 2010, 2011, that they're willing to do that. But China plans, as just one example, to go from 1 million electric vehicles to over 4 million in the next 4 years. The U.S. has similar plans, so does Canada, and so does Europe. The International Energy Agency would argue that that's not feasible. So it doesn't have to be that China would want to control because of a malevolent intent, but just that they intend to be competitive. And without US and Canada and our allies being much more active than we've shown in the past, and frankly, with any of the plans to become active now, then we won't get there from here, and we will lose national security both economically and through military power. Thanks, Gene.
General, thanks. I'd like to ask now a question of Jeff Labonté, Assistant Deputy Minister in the Lands and Minerals Sector of Natural Resources Canada. Give us the state of play right now. How far have we gone? How much progress have we made already in creating cooperation between the US and Canada in this area?
Well, thanks for the question and thanks for the opportunity today. I really appreciate it. I guess the answer to the question in the shortest form is to say we have awareness, and that's probably our first initial challenge as a set of countries and allies that have recognized, some scholars and others long before now, but I would suggest that we are now at the point at which we realize the severity and criticality of this conversation, which is, I think, probably our first challenge, having been one that we've met. On that note, certainly President Biden and Prime Minister Trudeau have doubled down and signed on to a joint action plan and in the roadmap in their first meeting. And of course, Canada would have always noted, as the United States have as well, that President Biden addressed Canada as the first nation outside of the United States, to which there was an engagement. That engagement set a roadmap for us to work more cohesively on a number of fronts. And the most important of those from the perspective of this conversation would be the Joint Action Plan on Critical Minerals, because it recognizes that neither of our countries could operate and move forward without the other, and that together we would and will be stronger, as we always have been from an allied perspective. And we see that as being Canada, United States primarily, but including our allies in the Five Eyes world and in the world of our transnational relationships with Europe. We see that the integrated approach builds on our long-standing economic securities and ties. There were some great examples about cars and vehicles crossing borders, but more importantly about the economic ties that bind our countries. Those economic ties go from the companies and the patents, the engineers and the people that cross the borders, and the investment flows that happen between our two countries, which stimulate and grow the economy, but also have a special relationship that parallels none other in the world. The framework that we have in an action plan really actually is a challenge of trying to coordinate multiple government agencies operating in multiple fronts. An example of that today would be that NRCan recently received budget approval for a critical minerals center of excellence. For us, that's our way of creating the opportunity that pulls together all of my partners in the federal system, and as we'll hear from my colleague Nathalie from Quebec, our partners in the provincial system. So in Canada, like the United States, we have a multinational level of relationships between jurisdictions and government responsibilities. And part of building on the awareness point is to build the framework that allows us to collaborate and identify problems and work towards solutions. So the second part really is about getting organized. The part that's, I think, most challenging for us, and I think we'll have a good discussion about it today, is how to bring the private sector and the academic community and the experts to bear on the questions at hand. Interests in the public and private realm often fit together quite nicely, and on critical minerals in terms of their importance, we are certainly well aligned, but not always do we see the same level of alignment between interests as they might relate to profits and earnings and responsibilities to shareholders and markets, and those that might be interested in public good, broader security, and other relationships. So our work and challenge as two nations and working together is to try and bridge some of those gaps and to continue to grow the opportunities. And together, we're already making some headway. So for example, just in the last couple of months alone, working with our partners in the Department of Commerce, we've held an Atlantic Canada Mining Trade and Investment Seminar. There was one in November, in which both Canada and United States governments have been working to bring together states, provinces, and private sector investors. Bringing the partners together is our way to integrate and to build further momentum. I've got some really good examples that I'll share with you. A Newbold Graphite's partnership with the U.S., having them as a panel that will come next, is working with a United States company to build coatings on graphite material. The United States has a mine that's producing nickel in Michigan, which is operated by a Canadian mining company, which then sends the nickel that's drawn from the ground into our Sudbury manufacturing facilities where the nickel is processed. So as we've kind of identified and Professor Lang had pointed out, there's already a certain level of sophistication that exists in the market, and our challenge will be to continue to build on that and to identify those gaps and to together work to build a momentum so those supply chains are as strong as the weakest link between our two nations and the partners that we work with more broadly. I look forward to the conversation. There's a lot more to discuss, and certainly engagement with everyone is a tremendous opportunity, and I thank you for the opportunity today.
And thank you for your comments. Gary Stanley's also with us. He is the director of the Office of Material Industries in the U.S. Department of Commerce. Let me ask you, the White House has released a review of supply chains, which included critical minerals. Can you summarize for us the findings of this study?
Well, first of all, let me begin by saying, Gene, thank you so much for your introduction, as well as for the participation in today's panel. This is a real privilege, a real honor, and one of the things that I especially enjoy is meeting multiple stakeholders across the spectrum for an issue that has such a comprehensive impact on both our national as well as economic security. So, Gene, many of you know that on June the 8th, the report was released by the White House. It was done in conjunction with a total of 4 separate supply chain reviews, and critical minerals, of course, being a part of that. The interesting thing that I noticed about the report as we were working with the interagency was that the Defense Department was given the government lead as far as coordinating the actual report itself. But really, when I look at this and want to communicate to the folks on the call today, as well as others that we'll speak with, is that really the report could best be described as a whole of government interagency assessment. By my count, some 15 federal agencies, along with multiple offices at the White House, participated in the drafting as well as the review of the report. The reason why this is important, and I can emphasize for this group, is that many of you are aware that finding 1 or 2 agencies that can agree on anything is a major accomplishment. Well, when you bring together 15 different agencies across the federal executive landscape, and they all agree on a single report, that in and of itself is an extraordinary accomplishment, because you guys will appreciate that each agency brings not only its own mandate as well as its specific area of expertise and assignment, but they provide unique capabilities. And those unique capabilities can be brought to bear to increase the effectiveness of working on a particular report and a strategy, but also ensuring the big picture of sustainability of strategic and critical material supply chains are ensured. Commerce is a classic example. So we're just one agency, but there were 5 different bureaus and operating units in commerce that participated. So there was the Bureau of Economic Analysis, the Bureau of Industry and Security, the unit that I work in, which is the International Trade Administration, but also NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, but also NOAA, National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. So, you know, you're looking at an extraordinary accomplishment in a very short period of time. But really, when you turn to the 100-day report, Gene, to your question specifically, it does bear mentioning that the work that has been done in this particular area of looking at the risks and potential vulnerabilities in critical and strategic material supply chains has really been going on for some time. But really, for the last 5 years, we have seen more of a public-facing, forward-looking, and problem-solving approach to address this issue that, again, I think we all would agree has both national economic as well as national security implications. The 100-day report is a very decisive and comprehensive action plan that involves not only the administration, but also involves the Congress. It involves stakeholders up and down the supply chain, but also non-governmental organizations and the academics to support this effort to develop sustainable production and conservation of strategic and critical materials. As you might expect, not surprising to many of us, that the focus, a lot of work that has already been done, is looked at advanced lithium-ion batteries. In the report itself that was released on June 8th, there were 7 total recommendations. But of the 7, I wanted to briefly just highlight 4, not only for time's sake, but also because I believe that these 4 are the most relevant to today's audience, and also where commerce as an agency will bring substantial resources to bear. The first one is developing and fostering new sustainability standards for strategic and critical material intensive industries. Secondly is expanding sustainable production and processing capacity, including the area of recovery from secondary and unconventional sources, as well as recycling. Thirdly, something that gives my office great enthusiasm is the idea of convening industry stakeholders in order to expand production. And then lastly, perhaps the thing in the International Trade Administration that gives us the most thrill is the idea of working with allies and partners to strengthen global supply chain transparency. So we believe that this approach, this comprehensive approach that has whole of government buy-in, as well as an enthusiastic engagement with our international partners, is going to mean success going forward.
Gary Stanley, thank you very much. And now let me introduce
Pleasure.
Nathalie Camden. She is Quebec's Associate Deputy Minister for Mines in the Ministry of Energy. Take it away, Nathalie. Oh, we're not hearing you.
Yeah,
There you are. Go
okay.
ahead.
So thank you for having me. It's a real honor to be with you today. And thank you for your question. As mentioned by previous speakers, critical minerals and developing the battery sector offer many opportunities to both countries. But where do Quebec stand on that? In fact, in the last year, the government of Quebec has unveiled two major initiatives: a national action plan on critical minerals, the first ever in Canada, covering all aspects from exploration to recycling, including processing and refining. And we have also a battery strategy aimed at attracting cell and CAM manufacturers to take advantage of our mineral potential, our expertise, and also our location within the North American space. At first, what we wanted to know what we had to offer and what was required to better support proponents to seize opportunities now and to accelerate projects for a midterm production. In that sense, like mentioned before, all departments, agencies, and bodies, we are closely working towards this goal, mainly Invest Quebec, Hydro-Québec, and of course, all the departments concerned. We want to provide the best conditions possible in a better, structured, and a faster way too. But what is it that we can offer as a province? Simply said, I would say that we have a stable, a secure, an ethical, and a sustainable environment. In fact, it's a good ESG report, but that you know, of course. But for those who might not be aware, Quebec has the most diversified mineral potential in Canada. 17 critical minerals appearing on the American list are present in Quebec, some being already extracted, others covered by mining projects. But we have those minerals needed to build batteries like nickel, lithium, cobalt, graphite, and copper. We even have rare earth elements for other uses, of course. But one of our major assets is certainly clean energy. Hydro-Québec generates more than 99% of its electricity from water, a source of clean, renewable energy at a low cost. We are the fourth largest producer of hydroelectricity in the world, and we can provide power to most mines and manufacturers. In terms of financing, we are offering for all phases a large portfolio of financial incentives such as loans, loan guarantees, grants, tax credits, and even governmental partnership in equity. In doing so, what we want is to reduce and to share the risk with investors. So these different tools, as well as those from the Canadian government with whom we're working very closely, we believe it will allow us to better fit our partners' needs. Our R&D ecosystem is also quite impressive in the battery sector and the sector of energy storage too. I would say that I personally believe that we are at a crossroads where we have to work together, first to meet the increasing demand for those minerals, but also to meet the needs for a low carbon economy. Increasing production in both countries in a sustainable way, combined with, of course, some additional actions for recycling, reusing, can certainly reach that target. So we believe that there's a good timing for all of us for greater cooperation based on what we've done over the last decade, which is a strong and resilient relationship. So as you can see, we are ready and we're open for business.
Thank you. And we are also open for questions. Let me remind the audience that you can submit them in the chat function. In fact, we have one already. General Newbold, this one is for you. From a strategic threat timeline, can you share where we are and how much time we have? And what can Canada, Mexico, and the USA do to address from a time perspective? And a little Semper Fi at the end.
Okay, Jane, valid question. I would submit that the timeline starts in 2011 when China used their enormous leverage in critical minerals to cut off the supply of rare earth metals to Japan. Japan learned a lesson from that. I would argue that we really have not, so we're already 10 years behind. If the IEA, the International Energy Administration, thinks that it takes 16 years to get a mine up and operating, to say nothing of the processing with the environmental costs of that, I would say we're substantially behind and that routine measures are not going to decrease that leverage and that'll leave us very vulnerable. The other part of the question involved Mexico, and I'm glad that was brought up. Canada has done an enormous amount, I would argue more than the United States. And Mexico has its own mineral resources. Canada has deep expertise in environmental considerations. It could be that Mexico is willing to participate in a way that might make them a site for processing, but that's just an idea for others to discuss. Thanks, June.
General, thanks. I'd like to ask, what is the biggest challenge? We have heard everybody's commitment. Everybody is aware of the problem. There are action plans. There are some agreements. But what is the biggest obstacle to making the kind of progress that the General says we need? Gary Stanley, let me start with you on that one.
I've said this for years. I was part of the commerce team that worked with USTR on several raw material trade cases under the Obama administration. And one of the areas that was, as was discussed, was the area of rare earths. And I said back then, we were talking about 12 years ago, the issue is the will to do it. Because we live in a world where there are so many political sensitivities and there are so many combative stakeholders in a process where everyone recognizes the problem, but isn't willing to make concessions. Because let's be candid with everyone on this call, as well as any future conversations, there is nothing we cannot achieve, but there has to be a will to do it. You have to bring together the right people, and every stakeholder needs to be heard up and down the supply chain and across every area possible. But there has to be a willingness for tough questions to be asked and answered. And then a strategy that takes in the best of all information. But once a decision is made on charting a path and to go forward, there has to be a willingness to support that effort. Because if not, we're going to blink just like we did to the mention that was just here. 12 years ago, we were literally dealing with these identical issues, and we blink and a dozen years goes by and we haven't made significant progress to address these. So I believe it's, in much as anything, is a will to compromise and a will to accomplish.
Do you believe that exists now?
For the first time in really a long time, the fact that in the last 5 years, we've seen so much public presentation of these issues, that there are more stakeholders across a cosmopolitan of different areas, from the public as well as the private, as well as the states, and you have governments also involved. I do believe that we are at the threshold of that kind of will to move forward and make compromises where we can, but also to make tough decisions that simply have to be executed.
Jeff Labonté, let me ask you, there are environmental and health concerns about around both mining and processing. How big a roadblock are those, and how do you overcome that roadblock?
Great question, and I think you have to start with recognizing that we have a unique opportunity now with the climate imperative and alignment between some of the larger policy issues that have a broader public interest that allow us to then turn back to ask ourselves, what is the environmental, what are the social, and what are the governance circumstances around the resources that are being developed and extracted. We know that Canada, the United States, some of the more, what we might say, advanced nations in the world, look at these things as primary factors and have deep concerns about making sure that the rest of the world has the same sets of standards that bring everyone, rises the tide and the boats of all. And so some of the work that we've been doing in Canada through the International Governance Forum on Mining, work that we have been doing led by the United States on ERGI, has been really working at trying to raise the standards around the world so that consumers of the raw materials, of the critical minerals, and of the mining processes are actually taking into account how were they processed? Were they using clean electricity? Were they processed in a way that the communities around the facility and the mining have actually taken into account the environment, that the benefits have actually been inclusive of the partners and players around it, are really important, so that when we're thinking about when we compete with China, and ultimately we will be, whether we're individualized or as partners, we want to be able to say there's a difference between the minerals that are produced in Canada and the United States, and we can guarantee that child labor wasn't involved, that forced labor wasn't involved, that emissions were part of the consideration of the processing, and that we're thinking through the complete aspects of the chain. And so disclosure and transparency and acknowledgement are important, and setting those standards. So Gary spoke about them. We have the same perspective in Canada. Nathalie has mentioned it, the ESG as it's called. It's super important. And as we drive forward in this world, North American, the population, consumers, Europeans, are already there. We expect that the population is demanding this of us, and working it all the way through the value chain is the next step.
But doesn't that put the West always at a competitive disadvantage to China, who does not observe the same standards and is unlikely to?
So it's a great question, Jean, and to a certain extent it might in one way. So on a pure economic level, perhaps. But if we take into account the broader set of factors of what's expected, so are the purchasers of electric vehicles interested purely in cost, or are they also taking environmental considerations and broader benefits to communities into account? I think we have different perspectives here that will emerge, and as we continue to push in this direction, as the rest of the world continues in the same path, that standard will be a requirement, and at that point we'll be able to compete even more significantly and make the difference.
Nathalie Camden, let me throw this audience question to you. What does the panel think of a critical minerals cooperative business structure, multi-stakeholders pooling together resources and factors of production such as land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship to serve the collective interest of the members? Is that a feasible approach?
I think it's one of the best approach. And what we've done in Quebec is we try to put all together all stakeholders to find a way to show how we can work together. And, small is beautiful sometimes. And in Quebec, we all know each other, and it's easier to get to the authorities. And we have to show the people that we have many assets, and we have to promote what we've been doing. We have a robust legal framework. It is based on transparency, and it helps our proponents to get investors being interested by their projects. So we have to make sure that the population and the citizens can be part of this big project, because they have concerns, and we have to respond to those concerns. And one way to do it is certainly to build partnerships with local communities also and with indigenous people. What we do in Quebec, especially the northern part of Quebec, where we have modern treaties.
General, let me ask you, there are many countries with rare and critical mineral deposits. Why not source from friendly countries rather than building mining operations in North America that face environmental and other obstacles?
That's the right question, Jean. This audience knows that the U.S. has one productive mine in rare earths at Mountain Pass, California, but we also use the products coming out of Australia from Linus Corporation. They cannot process them right now in Australia. They rely on Malaysia. And in Malaysia, the environmental concerns there threatened to shut down that processing ability about a year and a half ago. We have to rely on allies. We use the Germans already. One of the corporations, VAC, rely on the UK, but there are countries in Africa that have the critical minerals and the mining capability. The sensitivity there is both environmental and child labor, abuses of labor, et cetera. It has to be a global solution. The problem is too great and the timeline is too short to rely on just what we can do.
Gary Stanley, an audience question has come in for you. It says, can you talk to us about the cycle between extraction all the way to product? If Quebec and Canada has raw materials, already sends materials to companies in the US like Apple, and wants to produce battery cell components, anodes and cathodes, what does the US intend to do to support and incentivize in terms of transformation of those minerals for final product usage?
Well, first of all, that's an absolutely excellent question. And Jean, this is among the kinds of questions that we have been discussing among the interagency along with the White House. We too are looking for the early stages of how the White House will make recommendations in moving forward. But we see so many opportunities across a number of these areas. And again, the anode, the cathode, and specifically looking at lithium-ion batteries and others that really support the administration's overall broader areas related to climate change and relating to post-COVID-19 recovery, Made in America, and so forth. But that's where bringing together the right people, because it goes from our review of looking at this from a holistic but also an honest perspective. Just to the previous question, we can't source everything and do everything domestically. It does require a balance, but a delicate balance between what we can do domestically and what we can do with our international partners. Obviously, the very close ties with Canada feed so well into those kinds of conversations. Right after the federal strategy was released under the previous administration, myself and the acting undersecretary and a group of us went to PDAC and had one of the most amazing roundtables I've ever seen, because it brought together the right players with the right voices, but also the right vision on how to balance the cooperation across our borders, but also bringing together the experts that really are in the best place to be able to make recommendations and support the kind of technological development, the research and development, and the processing that is sustainable.
As you all know, we're going to have another panel with private industry, and I would really like to hear from those of you who represent governments what you'd like to see private industry doing. Jeff Labonté, why don't I start with you? What's your wish list for industry to really move the needle on critical minerals?
Thanks, Jean. I really appreciate it. I think from our perspective, what we hear in our roundtables we have, and we've had a number over the last little while, and some with the United States and some with other countries and industry. I think what we're looking for and we'd like to see from industry is a sense of closing the gap between the downstream, as it's known, the demand side, and the supply side that comes from the mineral and mining sector. The chain is what connects the two, but often what we'll find is the downstream players are really looking for the immediate source and perhaps the most cost-effective source or the most locally consistent source that they can find. And yet we know the problem is exploding, and we know that the demand is like going through the roof and will continue, as the IEA has pointed out. And so what's the opportunity there to kind of see where we can kind of close the chain a little bit more locally and make the link between the demand side and the supply side?
Natalie, do you want to take a crack at this? Again, I'm going to ask, by the way, the private sector what they want from government, but here's your chance to lay out your wish list. What would you like to see industry doing? Oh, you're mute again. Unmute for us.
In Quebec, we have the chance to be part of their financing demands. So it helps us to make sure that we don't duplicate efforts in a way to, especially regarding refining and processing. Sometimes there are big challenges, and we try to put them together to see if they can work better together at a certain phase. But it's difficult sometimes because they have to, they do some approach to investors, and they want to keep quiet some information and confidential some information. But as a government, if we know what they want and where they stand, we can help make links with other partners, potential partners. But we
Gary Stanley, what's your wish list?
Okay, we don't have that much time, Jean, so but I'll cut to the ones
Top three items.
Okay. Well, first of all, I think that there has to be engagement further downstream to the consumers, because the consuming end of this is really what's going to make any project sustainable. The government can certainly assist with technical R&D assistance and even financial assistance, but we recognize that these projects have to stand on their own merit. So whether it's offtake agreements or very specific long-term strategic commitments that are going to support these kinds of projects, because we all, I think, are honest enough on this call to know that on a cost basis, the United States and the Canadas and the Australias of the world are simply not going to be able to price compete with China. So we have to be able to look at this further down the scale, and there needs to be some very frank discussions with the folks that are downstream and engaging those people to support these kinds of projects, because if not, the likelihood of their long-term success, we have to be honest, is not very likely. And so I would like to see some further conversations down there, but I'd also like to see more engagement with the feds and the private sector and even the experts and academics to bring together and identify this real specific technical challenges. What are the technical issues that we're facing, and what is best to address those while maintaining sovereignty for the companies, but also recognizing that there are environmental issues and there are, frankly, productivity issues that have got to be addressed, so that they are not just one or two companies that benefit, but that's something that benefits the overall U.S. as well as Canadian economies.
General, a multi-pronged question for you. First, you may want to react to what you've just heard, but also you've been involved in discussions on this topic for some time. Are you seeing prospects for progress here? And a question from the audience, what incentives may be needed to drive progress?
Well, I would agree with the panelists who have said there are encouraging signs, but I'm personally not optimistic. The amount of resources applied by the United States may sound impressive, but in fact it's minuscule compared to the requirement. And also I would argue that, as Mr. Stanley said, the will is not there because the priority is not there. If we listed the priorities we have now, pandemic, climate change, go on and list the top 8, critical minerals doesn't make the list. But I would like to elaborate on the question you had, Jean, about private sector. I would argue that it is public sector, private sector, and scientific sector, because there are scientific needs to solve some of the problems, not just environmental, but alternative methods of using critical minerals. But here's an example. The private sector put together a group of investors to back Molycorp to in their efforts out at the Mountain Pass mine. This was a result of the very high cost of rare earth minerals coming out of China. Well, as soon as that began, China undercut all the prices to the degree that Molycorp had to declare bankruptcy. How do you solve a problem like that with public-private cooperation? It would surprise many people. The United States private sector does not generally produce the ammunition for the military, or another example, the tanks that we have. It is a public-private venture, government-sponsored, private sector managed issue, and I would argue that's what we need in critical minerals.
And we have to leave it there. Let me thank General Newbold, also Gary Stanley, Jeff Labonté, and Nathalie Camden. Thanks for your participation. And now a quick video to introduce our next panel. And welcome back. We are going to start the questioning with Patrice Boulanger, Vice President of Sales, Marketing, and Business Development at Newbold Graphite. Graphite is in your company's name, so explain to us its importance and where it is critical in terms particularly of electrification.
Yeah, graphite is definitely highly critical for the lithium-ion battery material, as it is the main constituent of the anode side of the battery. So in this respect, it is absolutely key for electrification that we have enough supply of graphite, being natural or synthetic, because both combined together offers unique properties. And in addition to this, it's not only for mobility that it is important. Also, there's a growing demand for energy storage, in which graphite is also used also on the anode. And graphite is also used in fuel cells, where hydrogen is being used for also mobility and for energy storage. So as you can see, graphite plays multi-role in different industries, and this is why graphite is key. Currently, more than 90% of graphite is being produced and transformed in China. So we're highly dependent on this. And this is why Nouveau Monde Graphite has a unique opportunity in this field in developing the largest natural graphite mine 2 hours north of Montreal. And in addition to this, it's going to be fully electrified. So Nouveau Monde has tackled the project so that we are walking the talk, and we are electrifying entirely our mining operation, which is an open pit. So it's more traditional to have electrification for underground mining, but for an open pit operation, economics are not always there, but Nouveau Monde has tackled it so that we're going to be the most advanced carbon neutral natural graphite producer worldwide.
Okay, Patrice, thank you. Justin Devaney, lithium. Tell us about lithium, what it's used for. I think we've all heard of lithium-ion batteries, but tell us a little bit more, and whether there's enough accessible lithium in the US and Canada to come anywhere near to meet the demand.
Hey, thanks, Jean. It's really a pleasure to be here and have this audience try to pick the brains of the private sector, because I think there's a lot the private sector has to offer. So lithium is the critical part of any lithium-ion battery, regardless of the chemistry involved. There are all kinds. General Newbold mentioned the military. Lithium has been used, lithium primary batteries have been used in weapon systems, in all types of devices for years. All of your implantable medical devices use lithium batteries. And today it's transportation, because if we're going to solve some of the problems with climate change, lithium-ion batteries allow the transfer of energy from renewable sources to transportation sources. The second question you ask is whether there's enough access. North America has some of the best reserves in the world. Here in North Carolina, where I'm located, is the cradle of lithium production. Nearly all of the Western world's lithium was produced here from the early 1950s until the 1990s when it moved to South America. We have an opportunity to restart production here in North Carolina. Quebec has great reserves, as you probably know. They're developing reserves in Alberta. Places like California and Nevada are also opportunities. So I think we have a great opportunity to satisfy our own needs and potentially become a major producer of lithium for the world.
Juan Merlini, Vail has a global footprint. What part does it have to play in establishing this North American supply chain we've been talking about?
Jean, thanks for the question and for the opportunity to be on this panel. It's a real pleasure. And Vale is the main producer of nickel in Canada. We produce 50% of the total nickel production. We have one of the best reserves and resources in Canada, and we also have operations outside Canada as well. So we are looking on top of nickel. We also produce copper, cobalt, PGMs, which are key for the whole electric vehicles industry. In terms of nickel, we really are looking in terms of how we can supply the whole EV industry and the battery industry that is coming. For sure, nickel it's a key metal for the battery, for the lithium batteries, because it provides energy density. And from all the projections you see, there will be a shortage of nickel because it's not any type of nickel. It's a very refined, it's a very pure nickel that it's required for the battery. So we are looking for ways to adapt our production in order to supply the needs for the industry, but also to unlock opportunities, unlock growth opportunities. It's not about only producing the nickel, but it's producing a sustainable nickel. We have one of the lowest CO2 footprints on our nickel that is produced in Long Harbor and in Sudbury as well. And that's key for the EV industry because they also require very low CO2 footprints into their batteries. The challenge is really how we can coordinate the whole supply chain, how we can adapt to the needs of the whole supply chain, because we have a very long supply chain. We have not only the raw materials, which we produce, but there is also, you have to connect with the active materials that then provide the materials for the productions of the batteries. So to synchronize, to have all this supply chain well established with the right economics, with the right timing, with the right let's say volumes, it's really critical. And I think there is a great opportunity in Canada, North America, and US to work together and to really to create a strategic batteries footprint, looking for the whole chain and in order to supply the industry.
Carolyn Chisholm, environmental laws and regulations were brought up in the first panel. Clearly, they've had an impact on mining operations, including some of Rio Tinto's. Explain what your company is doing to try address those issues, to try to reduce the footprint of the industry.
Thanks, Jean, and thanks to CABC for inviting Rio Tinto to the panel. Just to put it in context, for us, we're the second largest mining company in the world. We produce, like Vale, iron ore, aluminum, but we also copper, diamonds, but we also are involved in the critical mineral space. And it gets back to what Ian was talking about at the front end, about how you look at your core primary assets, and rather than just going after a single commodity, we've started to look at the richness of our assets through often what's in our mine waste and what we've come to term full value mining. And by taking that multi-metal, multi-mineral approach, we are reducing our environmental footprint in the process. Happy to announce that just today, thanks in part to the support of the Government of Quebec, we actually opened our pilot plant for our scandium oxide project. And that was developed as a result of the work of our Technology and Critical Minerals R&D Center at Sorel Tracy at Rio Tinto Fialage 10. That we were able to develop the process to extract scandium oxide from our titanium processing at the Sorel Tracy Metallurgical Facility. So it's really looking at what you have in your waste stream and what can we do to extract the value that would otherwise have been not considered in the past. We're doing in our other operations in North America, both at our boron mine. We've developed a lithium project from lithium from the boron waste stream. We are doing it at Kennecott, looking from our copper at rhenium and tellurium, all of which are important to this electrification, decarbonization commitment that we're all part of. But Jean, just wanted to respond to one of your questions from the previous panel, and to what the general had said previously is around, how do we make critical minerals a priority for governments? And it absolutely is about collaboration. We have to make the connection between critical minerals, and I think the US and Canadian governments have tried to do that through the roadmap exercise and the importance of securing sustainable supply chains. We have to make sure that the public understands the connection between the critical minerals piece and the climate piece. And even the pandemic piece, because we know that the pandemic, if you really want to analyze the impacts of the pandemic, you can't separate that from a conversation around climate change and biodiversity discussion. So it's really what we need to do from a public campaign perspective to make sure that the public is connecting those dots. And therefore, the more the public sees that, the more government will make this conversation a priority.
We have a question from the audience. What can be done to stop China making irresistible offers to private sector owners to gain control of critical mineral resources? If a widespread CM strategy emerges in the West, wouldn't this be their obvious strategic move? We've certainly seen them do it in other countries. Who wants to tackle that one? Austin, can I throw it in your direction first?
Sure, I'm happy to step in there, and I would say I probably would ask my larger mining companies to reference that because they've got longer experience in that. But, when you talk about strategies in how we deal with China making investments in critical mineral resources, they've done that. But most of them are public companies that they've done that in. So it's really alignment, and it's making sure our supply chain and it's forums like this that really will bring up the profile and make it a much greater issue. Congressman Doyle mentioned that he had been in one previous this week. I think it's these type of forums that really get the profile raised to a point that you see people who are now willing to make investments and be competitive with China. Because if you go to other countries to do that, it'll follow along.
Juan, how concerned are you about the Chinese move to buy up resources in Latin America and Africa and other places? And also, if I could tag onto that, as was mentioned in the previous panel, China has very successfully manipulated prices for these products. Talk about the challenges and how to deal with that.
Today, the prices for lithium, which I'm most familiar with, are the highest in the world in China. It's actually a very capitalistic profile they run through with lithium prices, and they're actually higher in China than they are in other parts of the world. But in terms of the nations that they deal in, they've made investments in South America, as you referenced. They made an announcement earlier this week that one of the Chinese companies was making an investment in Africa. And really, it will take a concerted effort to make sure that the complete supply chain, so automakers and all of the downstream companies or upstream companies from that, are making those same investments to secure those resources.
Juan, could you chime in on this, please?
Yes, please, Jean. Thanks for the question. I think we need to learn what the Chinese are doing and try to replicate and act fast. What the Chinese have been doing on the nickel industry in the last 10 years in Indonesia, it's something outstanding. They have been very, very aggressive, growing, developing the technology, implementing very quick, improving it, very cost efficient. and they are learning and reacting even more and more on that. And now they are replicating what they did for the nickel to the stainless steel into the battery materials. So we think I think it's a reality, and we need definitely to act faster. We need to learn and to ensure there is the right let's say the right focus, because one of the areas which I think now the Chinese are looking more and they understand that will be critical for the battery materials is the sustainability, right? So it's all about environmental, it's all about the CO2, and this is an area that they are starting to move fast. And I think it's where probably North America, and we are seeing that in Europe as well, has an opportunity to catch up, because I think we have, on top of the resources, a much more advanced in terms of opportunities, in terms of bringing a low carbon energy source, and hydro, solar, wind. So it's a reality. We can't deny it. We can't compete against it. It's about learning and leveraging that.
We heard the general talk earlier about the time frame, and frankly, that we should have been doing this 10 years ago. We're way behind the 8 ball here. Do any of you think that the U.S. and Canadian sectors, cooperatively or otherwise, can realistically catch up? Carolyn, do you want to tackle that?
Let me take the example of our ELYSIS project. I know it's not about critical minerals per se, but it gets to the point that Jeff Labonté made in the last panel. And if we want to compete as a sector or an industry, we have to collaborate. And I know the general has said that as well. And it will require not just collaboration between the public and the private sector, it will require collaboration between industry players that may have normally competed in the sector. In the case of ELYSIS, Rio Tinto and Alcoa came together to develop the zero carbon aluminum smelting technology, because we knew that separately we weren't going to be able to do that on our own as quickly as we liked, and we had to work together. So I think that's going to be the mentality, as Juan has mentioned, that we're all going to have to adopt, and that may mean parking some egos at the door and realizing that sometimes someone else may be better at something that we are, but we're better at others, and we just have to get together, roll up our sleeves, and do the work. And really, at the end of the day, if we don't do it, and others have talked about the connection to the consumer, we know from public opinion polling in Canada around the mining industry that we're seen as an old industry, and we're seen as part of the problem, not part of the solution for climate change. Well, if we're going to attract the scientists that we actually need to, and the PhDers that we need to be able to figure out, crack the code that is processing of critical minerals, they need to know that they're coming to an industry that wants to address that key issue, the existential issue of our times. So it is about, I'm going back to the world that I know is on the external affairs and communications and policy side. All of these elements have to work together if we're going to get there fast. It does mean more collaboration, more discussion between the US and Canadian governments, between industry and between competitors. Otherwise we're not going to get there.
Ian, I have a feeling you might want to weigh in here, and I want to ask you, can we innovate our way out of this problem, either by finding synthetics, extracting critical minerals from what are now considered waste products, or some other means?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly possible to innovate our way to better solutions, whether that be, using less cobalt in a battery when we had concerns about the environmental and labor standards of the cobalt being produced. I don't see so much, at Colorado School of Mines, I don't see so much that mining is seen as a bad thing. So I'm not so sure that it's seen as a sort of a dying industry as much, but I guess I have a concern that it's hard to change that perspective. In the US, certainly we're very cognizant of the permitting issues to permitting new mines. We haven't brought this up yet, but certainly there's a number of critical mineral mines that have been attempting for decades to get a permit. I think at some point it's going to say, look, you know, we do have to move dirt to make this happen. It is not, nothing's going to be perfect, but, you know, somehow we have to move forward.
So I'm curious about the rest of you. We had Carolyn say essentially the industry has to adapt and has to take into account some of these environmental concerns. But do all of you also feel that there has to be a change in environmental laws and regulations for you to actually make progress, the kind of progress that's needed on critical minerals mining and processing? Patrice, do you have a thought?
Definitely. I think what we're looking at, and I'm talking more about nouveau monde graphite here, is we also need to start walking the talk as an industry. Electrification is addressing end consumer, and that's really interesting, and that's the purpose. So that's the reality. But also upstream and downstream, refiners, mining operation needs to look at it and to see how they can integrate those new technology that you just touched on, where we can improve the CO2 emission and balance while by our own actions. And I think that will help also the mining, let's say, perspective that the people have of this old industry, as it was mentioned. I think there's ways of doing it. And if we look at our resources here in Quebec with the hydroelectricity, it's really a big plus when you think of electrifying it, because first of all, cost-wise, it's very attractive. And also it has a very important impact on your CO2 emission. So these things together, I think, brings a lot of innovation and also brings you closer to a better environmental balance sheet.
Anybody else want to weigh in on that one? Austin or?
Yeah, Gene, that's it's really interesting what Ian was describing in terms of mining, because here for Piedmont in North Carolina, I reference all the time that the state of North Carolina has 712 active mine sites. There are 20 active mine sites greater than 100 acres within 20 miles of our site. If you're going to have building products and you need gravel, that's a mine. Some people call it a quarry, but exactly what the lithium industry is doing are mines, but they're also quarries, and we have products that come out of there. So bringing people, as Carolyn said, bringing in new energy into what are older industries is vital to bringing in new techniques that will move our industry forward, help improve climate change, and reduce the emissions across the chain, and we'll lead that around the world.
I offered the earlier panel of government officials the chance to give me their wish list on what they wanted to see from all of you. Now it's your turn. What would each of you like to see government do, particularly governments in the US and Canada, provincial and state governments? What would you like to see them do to try and push forward the progress in this field? Juan, can I start with you?
Sure, Jen. And I think first, definitely in order to fill this gap between the demand and supply, we need, I think we will need some support, because as the whole industry now, and it's looking for its own solutions, right? We are not being able to find, let's say, the perfect equation. So returns in terms of financial support. So I think in order to improve that and fill the gap, I think the financial support will be key in order to align the industry. The second, it's about, I mean, continue focus on creating more sustainable standards in terms for extraction and processing the critical materials. I think this is where probably we will level the game and will be key for the industry. And a third point that we didn't mention here, but very important for the supply chain of batteries, is the recycling. This is coming. This is something that will definitely have a very important share in the future. So creating the environment, creating the standards, fostering that, we are looking and trying to understand how we can operate recycling battery materials. It will be key. That's very advanced in Asia. It's starting to be more advanced in Europe, and I think there is a big opportunity for North America to create much better standards in terms of how we can leverage the recycling for these critical minerals.
One, I'd like to follow up on that if I could. As you mentioned, others have already developed this capacity. Does it exist at all right now in North America, recycling?
It exists for sure in the case of nickel, where the batteries are starting to be used and the numbers of EVs are starting to come out. There's still not enough material to be recycled. But yes, there are some small, let's say some small groups of let's say recycling pools. But we need to look, I mean, ahead of time and really try to create the whole standards and in terms of legislation, in terms of how to handle the material and how to create the proper, let's say, the proper opportunities. We see a huge opportunity to close the gap, not only producing the nickel, selling to the EV, and taking back the batteries and recycling it. There is a huge opportunity there, and that's on a longer horizon, but we need to act now.
Has China already got the jump on us, though, because they're doing it?
Sure, they are much ahead in terms of recycling capacity. Europe's starting to organize that, and I think there's a big opportunity for North America.
Okay, let me get back to the wish list. Carolyn, what would you like to see government do to try and make movement here?
Well, I'll go back again to what Ian said at the top of the call was the challenge for the critical mineral sector being high fixed costs and low margins. I think, and you'll see with our Scandium pilot project, we are doing it in a stage gated approach. So it would be great that programs in the Quebec government and often state or provincial governments tend to be more flexible in their program approach than the federal government. So I think to have that kind of built-in program flexibility so that governments are able to walk that project journey with us in an iterative way. Because as you know, there's unique market dynamics when it comes to critical minerals, and they're not going to be those big major projects all at once. So if we have that kind of program flexibility, and Jeff Labonté has heard me and others on the line have heard me say this, so this is not a new message from me, but that would be one of the things I would think we need to think about. But as well as you said, a lot of it is about cracking the code around processing these critical minerals, and that requires R&D. You know, as a large mining company, we're lucky that we still have the capacity to do R&D, both at our facility in Sorel-Tracy as well as in the Saguenay for our aluminum operations. And it's precisely the reason why we're able to develop a master alloy. The two businesses came together, but making sure that there's those incentives are in place to ensure that that R&D can happen, I think is also going to be really important.
Carolyn, the U.S. government is putting some money towards R&D in this sector very quickly. Anywhere near enough?
I won't speak to the U.S., but I know, again, I've said this to Jeff on the Canadian side, and no, it's not enough, but we're hopeful that there'll be more there. So,
Ian, you're smiling quickly. Anywhere near enough money being put into R&D by the U.S.?
Oh, I mean, come on, as someone at a university, I can't laugh but say, oh yeah, we need more R&D.
Here's your chance. Here's your chance.
Right,
Ian. Make your
right. So sure. Give us more money. We'll always take it.
Austin, your wish list for the government?
Yeah, it's pretty short. It's threefold. One of them we're doing today. Things like this raise the awareness across a broad spectrum of private and public groups, which I think is very, very valuable in helping. Second, the United States had the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act in 2008 and 2009, which provided a lot of matching grants to the lithium-ion battery industry. And those matching grants went a long way to developing a supply chain. Maybe a little premature, but it did a lot for developing an industry that at that time had very little demand. But today we're kind of progressing. The third is consistent regulations, whether that's transport emissions, recycling, having a consistent and long-term view on what those regulations should be will help private industry align what they're able to do and invest in. Europe's doing that. China has done that. The United States has been a little bit hit or miss. I don't think Canada has done as much in terms of emissions, but that's where we need to move forward.
Patrice, very quickly, your thoughts on what you'd like government to do?
Help to populate the talent pool that this industry needs for the outer years. I'd like to segue on what someone mentioned before, there will be a significant need, and that need will accomplish many things, not only production, but also for R&D purposes. There's a lot of talent needed in this field and professionals. So I think that would be the key point I would like to raise in this panel today.
Great. Thanks to all of you, Patrice Boulanger, Austin Devaney, Juan Merlini, and Carolyn Chisholm. So much appreciate you all being here with us today. I'm Jean Meserve, and thanks so much for a great conversation. And thanks to all of you in the audience who participated with us today.